He grew up surrounded by order, schedules, expectations, and polished furniture, yet inside his mind everything felt curiously unfinished, as if the world had been carefully arranged while the questions were left scattered on the floor. This mismatch created a quiet tension early on, because while adults spoke of certainty and proper paths, he sensed invisible connections flickering between plants, stones, clouds, and people. Young Alexander often appeared calm, even obedient, though his attention drifted constantly, pulled not by rebellion but by an almost aching curiosity about how unseen systems held everything together. Crowded rooms made him observant rather than loud, because watching how people moved, paused, and avoided silence felt as informative as any spoken lesson. He learned early that wonder was not always welcomed, especially when it slowed conversations or complicated neat explanations meant to comfort rather than provoke. This subtle resistance sharpened his inner conflict, since his desire to understand the world deeply clashed with the pressure to memorize it politely. Books became companions, not as escapes, but as windows layered upon other windows, each opening into landscapes that refused to stay separate from one another. While others collected facts like trophies, he noticed patterns, sensing that mountains and music, insects and history, weather and human emotion all followed rhythms that echoed across boundaries. Such noticing made him feel slightly out of step, because he could never look at one thing without thinking about what surrounded it. Even as a young student, writing felt less like recording knowledge and more like tracing threads, carefully, patiently, afraid that pulling too hard might break something delicate. Teachers praised his diligence yet seemed puzzled by his questions, which wandered sideways instead of forward, lingering on relationships rather than conclusions. This puzzled admiration followed him quietly, reinforcing a sense that he belonged intellectually yet remained emotionally peripheral. Moments of solitude did not feel empty to him, because observation filled the space, making silence active rather than lonely. Nature, especially, offered comfort without explanation, allowing him to sit with unanswered questions while still feeling oriented. He noticed how hills changed character with light, how air thinned with height, how temperature shaped mood, storing these impressions long before assigning them names. Travel stories stirred him, not for adventure alone, but because movement promised new perspectives that might confirm or challenge his growing sense of connectedness. At gatherings, while others debated loudly, he listened intently, amused by how confidently people defended partial truths. This quiet amusement softened his seriousness, adding a gentle humor to his observations rather than sharp judgment. He learned restraint, understanding that sharing every insight could overwhelm listeners who preferred simpler narratives. Still, restraint carried cost because unspoken curiosity accumulated, pressing inward and demanding release. Writing notebooks filled with diagrams, fragments, and reflections, not organized for others but arranged to help him think aloud on paper. The act of writing slowed him down in helpful ways, turning racing thoughts into pathways he could revisit. He sensed early that knowledge carried responsibility, because understanding relationships meant recognizing consequences. This awareness unsettled him, especially when institutions celebrated mastery without acknowledging interconnected harm. Despite privilege and education, belonging remained conditional, since his way of seeing resisted easy categorization. He did not reject structure, but he constantly tested its flexibility. Science, for him, felt less like control and more like conversation. Emotion and measurement coexisted uncomfortably, each refusing to yield entirely to the other. He felt excitement tempered by caution, imagination balanced by discipline. The world appeared vast yet intimate, orderly yet unpredictable. As years passed, sensitivity became strength, though it still felt fragile. His inner map expanded faster than his external reach. He remained patient, trusting accumulation over immediacy. Questions matured alongside observation. Wonder stayed intact, ambition remained quietly deferred. Connection mattered more than recognition. Direction formed slowly, curiosity stayed restless. Perspective widened gently, purpose lingered unresolved. The world continued calling softly. He listened closely. He prepared inwardly. Understanding waited. Movement approached. Movement did not arrive as a dramatic leap, but as a steady widening of attention, because each new landscape he encountered felt less like discovery and more like recognition, as though his inner maps were finally touching the real world. He began to travel with notebooks that absorbed humidity, dust, and hurried thoughts, and while others focused on destinations, he lingered on transitions, noting how forests thinned, colors shifted, and sounds softened without announcing themselves. These gradual changes fascinated him more than landmarks because they confirmed his belief that meaning lived between points rather than at them. Fatigue accompanied this way of seeing, since constant observation required patience and emotional availability, yet exhaustion never fully muted his curiosity. Writing became heavier with detail and lighter with certainty, as his sentences stretched to hold relationships instead of conclusions. He felt increasingly responsible for accuracy, not out of fear, but because careless description could fracture delicate truths he sensed everywhere. Encounters with other thinkers energized him selectively, since he preferred conversations that unfolded slowly and tolerated silence. Disagreement rarely disturbed him, though oversimplification created quiet irritation that lingered long after polite exchanges ended. Nature continued teaching without speaking, offering lessons in balance, interdependence, and quiet persistence. He noticed how human systems mirrored natural ones imperfectly, often forcing order where adaptation would have served better. This realization deepened his inner conflict because admiration for human ingenuity mixed with concern about its blindness. Moments of awe remained frequent, especially when observation aligned suddenly with understanding. Those moments arrived unexpectedly, like light breaking through cloud, brief yet reshaping everything around them. He learned to trust such insights without rushing to explain them fully. Humor survived as a gentle undercurrent, expressed through patient irony rather than sharp commentary. Even in formal settings, he retained a sense of play, delighted by curiosity that refused hierarchy. His writing grew more ambitious, attempting to weave science, emotion, and experience into a single voice. Readers, though unseen, began to feel present in his mind, shaping his care with language. The act of explanation transformed into an act of invitation rather than instruction. Time felt elastic during periods of intense observation, compressing days into insights and stretching minutes into contemplation. Loneliness returned occasionally, not from isolation, but from carrying perspectives difficult to share fully. Still, he accepted this as part of the work, understanding that connection often followed patience. Recognition arrived unevenly, sometimes late, sometimes unexpectedly, rarely in the forms he imagined. Such recognition mattered less than resonance, which he sensed when ideas found their way into other minds. He continued refining his ability to see wholes without ignoring parts. Details remained sacred because every small variation contributed to larger patterns. Travel sharpened empathy, forcing him to confront unfamiliar customs without reducing them to curiosities. Observation shifted inward as often as outward, revealing how perception shaped interpretation. Certainty remained provisional, always open to revision. Confidence grew slowly, grounded in sustained attention rather than authority. His voice matured, balancing wonder with restraint. The world appeared increasingly interconnected, yet increasingly fragile. Concern quietly joined curiosity. Responsibility deepened alongside understanding. Still, joy persisted, especially when learning felt communal. Curiosity remained the engine, never satisfied, never exhausted. He accepted complexity without demanding resolution, purpose clarified without narrowing. Movement continued, guided by questions rather than answers. Observation stayed central, imagination expanded responsibly. Connection intensified, understanding thickened. The horizon widened again. Silence retained meaning, wonder endured. The story leaned forward.